are the world's greatest mercenaries. The only life they've ever known is war. The only loyalty they've ever had is to each other.
Drop your guns!
Got the 4 on the left.
Why don't you take the 2 on the right and leave the rest?
You're not that fast anymore.
Oh, here we go.
The only thing faster is...
Light.
Exactly.
We'll see.
Well, I got 3 pieces of work. 2 a walk in the park and 1 to hell and back.
So, we are working for the agency.
I gotta recon this island first.
The only thing you need to know is the job's real and the money's real.
Give this job to my friend here. He loves playing in the jungle, right?
Right.
What's his problem?
Was that the concert?
Follow me, please. People who fight back are killed. Now we have a dying place. Maybe you can help.
I don't think so. Sorry, I'd leave. What's wrong with this picture?
Everything.
We don't have the manpower, the firepower. We'd be dead in the water.
Ray, they got a small army. What do we got? 4.5 men.
That's so funny. You know, it's not easy being your friend.
We will kill this American disease!
I promised myself I'm gonna die for something that counts.
People live through terrible times, but you must believe you can survive.
10 seconds, you won't believe what's gonna happen.
What happened to you?
Got my ass kicked.
Are you crazy? Could have killed me!
You're welcome.
Every one of us is expendable!
Got a problem with that?
Hi, everyone, and welcome once again to Geekfest Rants. Today, we are going back to continue and to finish our Stallone retrospective. We've been examining his career from the early 70s all the way through present. And last time we were talking about this, we kind of left off right before you could call his big return with Rocky Balboa.
Yeah.
Joining me today, once again, is Steve Avona, our Stallone expert, if you will.
/ fanatic.
Fanatic, stalker, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
And Steve, like we said before, we left off introducing Rocky Balboa, which was a return. And, you know, we talked about this going back to the well thing and going back to his strength thing. Tell us about what we were just coming off of as far as the Rocky series goes and why it was a return to Rocky that all of a sudden he decided to go after.
Well, Rocky V had been considered a disappointment. Box office wise, critically, not to say that the last few Rocky movies didn't do well critically, but even Stallone himself considered Rocky V a personal disappointment. And the way he left the character at the end of the film, he wasn't comfortable with it. The fans were upset that he ended the film with a street fight. And obviously people want to see Rocky in the ring, and they want to see all the familiar conventions of a Rocky movie, and he thought he would switch it up, and it really fell flat. But the way the film ended, you really got a sense that this was it, that they were finished with the series and there really was no place left to go. You flash forward about 15, 16 years, and even after all the jokes about doing another Rocky movie and, you know, Rocky having arthritis and Rocky having Alzheimer's, you know, all the kind of things that were said about it, Stallone started talking about it in a very serious way. Like, yes, I want this to happen. I owe it to the fans. And even the studio wasn't taking him seriously. But as I mentioned in the earlier podcast, there was a changing of the guard at MGM. And the new regime there became receptive to the notion of another Rocky film. And because of all the reverses that happened to him in his career, he went from being the top of the box office in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, to having his films go straight to video by the early 2000s. He was really hitting rock bottom. He couldn't get a movie off the ground. He had done some TV guest spots.
That's the thing. Not only was his film career dwindling, he had to, what you would consider, resort to television.
Yes, which is usually an embarrassment to anybody of his stature.
Of his stature, correct.
And I think I mentioned this earlier. He was on a reality show called The Contender about boxing with Sugar Ray Leonard that followed the sort of reality TV conventions of contestants vying for, a spot in the this and the that. And it was just, to me, I was embarrassed for him. But as I said, he was really serious about doing another Rocky film. And the studio, everything sort of fell into place. And they green-lighted it. I think I was as stunned as anybody else. I was happy because I felt like I was listening to what he was saying. He was patterning Rocky after himself, like he did in the first Rocky. This was his last shot. If he couldn't get this film taken seriously, and there was a very good chance it wouldn't be taken seriously, then I think he would have been done. His goose would have been cooked. But he rose from the ashes. Rocky Balboa came out. Critics liked it. Audiences liked it. It was what I would consider a mild hit.
What would you compare it to as far as success with the previous Rocky films?
Now, you got to remember, too, it's very hard to compare dollars because the other Rockies came out. You have to adjust for inflation and all that kind of stuff. But I think box office-wise, it did far better than Rocky V. It didn't do as well as Rocky IV, which was the biggest financial hit.
Right.
Critically, it was the best reviewed since the original.
Wow. Because it didn't have any of the extra Mr. T types or Drago types.
Yeah, the villains were not super villains. And what he did, now let's be honest here, he tried to do this in Rocky V and he failed. He brought him back to his roots. What the interesting thing is, Rocky V had to happen for Rocky Balboa to happen because at least what happened in Rocky V got him to the point in Rocky Balboa. He lost all his money. He was back to where he started. But the most interesting thing he did with Rocky Balboa, and I was very much in favor of this because all the Rocky films follow a certain formula, especially the later ones. It's, Rocky has to fight. Adrian doesn't want him to fight. He decides to fight anyway. She's against it. And then she comes around.
Right. Fail, succeed. Fail, succeed.
Right. Now this one, Adrian's dead. I mean, I feel bad for Talia Shire, but I think that was a great story point. It brought him to the lowest point he could possibly be at. He's devastated that his wife is gone. He's got no direction in life. He is constantly referring to her memory. He's living in the past, and he's filled with this rage that she's gone. And his son is kind of estranged from him. And, he's got Paulie, but you know what Paulie's like. And he's got this restaurant.
Everybody's got a Paulie.
Yeah. And he's got a restaurant. It's called Adrian's. It's filled with pictures of her. It's where he goes and he tells old stories to the customers. And it's actually kind of sad. And he's feeling this loss, this loneliness. And he really is at a low point. And he comes to the realization that he needs to somehow vent this rage and get rid of it. And he feels like the natural thing to do is to fight. And he gets it in his head that he's going to not stage a major comeback, but just start fighting again in clubs locally. And the press gets a whiff of this and says, why not fight the champ? And it harkens back to there was a simulated fight between Muhammad Ali and Rocky Marciano back in the late 60s, because everybody always wondered who would win that fight, and they made a movie about it, and Ali and Marciano kind of had a sparring session, and a computer in the 1960s came up with the idea of who won, and it was Marciano and Ali.
So it would look like Pong, basically.
Yeah. And so they used that as an inspiration for the idea of Rocky fighting the champ. And the managers of the champ, Mason Dixon, but he's not popular. The sport is not popular anymore. It's taken a backseat to MMA and all this other stuff. And they figure this is a great way to revitalize the sport and get the champ in the headlines. He'll fight Balboa. That's what happens. Rocky takes it seriously, much like the original film where the champ fought him and thought it was going to be a joke. Rocky, laid him out, went the distance. Same thing here. I mean, in that sense, there's nothing new. He does fight him. He loses, but he's still standing at the end of the fight, and he's kind of purged himself of his demons by doing that. It was just a very sort of heartwarming story in the way the original Rocky was. There was nothing preachy about it. They really didn't go to the typical Rocky conventions, even though it felt fresh while at the same time reminding you of the original, but not in a rip-off kind of way.
And they wrap it up where you could say the fans are happy. This is a good bookend.
Without question. It's a great bookend. It's even the kind of film you could not have seen all the movies in between. You could see Rocky and Rocky Balboa, and that's all you'd need to see. So I was overjoyed with it.
Well, that's good. I mean, it's a good way of finishing off the character as far as saying, you know what? It's a good place to stop.
Yes, absolutely.
Interestingly enough, he follows this film with another, what you could call a trip to the well in terms of one of his biggest successful characters, Rambo.
Right. Yeah, well, you're talking about probably the second most popular character he's ever been involved with.
Right. 2 years later,
He does
2008, it's just called Rambo.
Right, but the director's cut is called John Rambo. There's a director's cut on Blu-ray,
Oh.
which is, I believe, about 10 minutes longer. I've seen it.
Now, this is a very different looking film.
Yeah.
To me, it looked the most different from the previous three.
Yeah.
The previous three, you can kind of clump them together.
Absolutely.
This is something new because not only does it look different, there's a different style, there's a different feel to the way they're presenting now this film.
I have to say, I think that Stallone was a very smart man by going back to the well with these two characters and giving them both some closure. Yes, you could say that 2 and 3 are sort of comic book violence.
Yes.
You know, yes, there's a lot of shooting and there's a lot of this and there's a lot of that, but Rambo is hyper violent.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about, I can't believe they got away with an R rating.
It's almost, to me, kind of like a 90s Hong Kong cinema type of violence.
It's all there. I mean, you see it all. You see disembowelments and decapitations and everything. He's deciding to present it in a realistic way. That's what war looks like.
Well, that's the thing. It almost feels like they looked at the action genre and decided it's not the 80s or the 90s anymore. Action now, if you're going for full tilt action, has to be this extremely violent, border R,
X,
not rated, X rated, whatever type of violence.
Yeah. And again, I thought it was a bold decision and I thought it was the right decision. And also, he's taking the character, much like Rocky, he's at his lowest point. He has this hatred for just about everything. He's surly and he's mean and he's nasty and he doesn't want to help anybody. He doesn't want to be bothered. And you just got the sense that, we don't know what's happened to him in the last 20 years, but we just get the sense that he's been so screwed over. And obviously, you assume that Richard Crenna's character is long dead.
Right.
So that was his only friend. And he's just turned his back. The country turned his back on him, and he's turned his back. He's living in...
Is it in Indonesia or somewhere in the...
I think it's... He's near the border of Burma, and I think it's Cambodia that he's living in.
This particular one deals with some aid workers get kidnapped, and they're going to execute him, and he's kind of brought in to see if he can get them the hell out.
Right, and reluctantly. He has a sort of a soft spot for a woman that tries to kind of reach him, and he doesn't go along with them. They get captured, and he gets tied into rescuing them. And what's interesting is, and I was really appreciative of this, is they're playing him like a human being. He's not a superhero. He goes in there with a team of mercenaries. It's not just Rambo.
Right.
It's not like Rambo 2, where he's rescuing this whole camp of people single-handedly, or Rambo 3. You're playing to his age, and you're playing to reality. And the way that the action is staged, everything from the rescue in the camp to the end of the film, it's like right in your throat. I mean, it just does not let up.
Right.
And the way it's shot, it's in that sort of hyper style.
Yeah, almost documentary looking, like almost 16 millimeter, like the Saving Private Ryan-ish kind of, that weird, the orange and the gray and all these weird colors.
And even though it's not, it doesn't look wrong, but in a way it looks kind of sped up.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like a shutter speed is just completely cranked, and you see there's no blurs. Everything is sharp and gritty, and you got to turn away every now and then.
Right. So Rambo was not as big a success as Rocky, but it was a success.
Now, I know that on previous films, when he uses other directors, he kind of takes over. In these two past films, because he directed them himself, do you think that kind of helped to put his vision forward, or it doesn't really matter?
Well, at least with these two characters, my attitude is, why should anyone direct? When he's playing these two characters, he should always be directing.
They're the big ones.
He's too close to them to let anybody else, interfere with that. And I was pleased that he directed both of them.
All right. Well, now we move closer to the present. We're moving now to 2010, only 2 years ago, where he tries out a different character, a brand new character. But I kind of see little bits and pieces of a lot of his other characters, and even in the style of the film itself, I think there's a little bit of Rambo in terms of the style. You're going for that extra action violence look. Not as crazy as Rambo, I think, but he turns it up a notch. But the big thing about this next film, which is The Expendables, it's not so much that, oh, look, Stallone's making another film. It's the fact that he got all these 80s and 90s action stars. That was the big hook of this film. And get them all together into somewhat of a coherent film, a fun action type of vehicle, and let them all do their thing, what they're known for.
I love the idea of The Expendables because I grew up on those films, and you did as well.
And I don't think we've ever seen something like this that's serious. In other words, we've seen cameos of people come in and, oh, look, that's the guy who used to be on blah, blah, blah. And they're doing a little shout out to him. But this is done on purpose, and it's in a way, it's serious.
Oh, yeah. And Stallone, I think he was, again, very shrewd because, the action genre, going all the way back to, say, Die Hard, where you had just a normal guy with a normal physique, fighting against people, using his wits and his brains and, kind of outfoxing them. And then you had heroes like John McClane, then you had the superhero genre, and you had the hyper matrixy sort of stuff going on. And Stallone wisely thought that maybe the people that grew up on his films would want to see something that harkened back to the stuff from the 80s with him and Schwarzenegger, and even to a lesser extent Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal and
like
Van
I said,
Damme.
and giving them meaty roles, not just cameos.
Right, yeah. I mean, he was like, let's put them all in the same movie together with some younger guys. I mean, Jason Statham is definitely, he's a younger guy from a new generation.
Do like a Magnificent Seven or a Wild Bunch type of thing.
Absolutely. And, again, he hit pay dirt. People, I think, were kind of laughing at him before it came out, and they were like, oh, some has-beens and, some of these guys who were, I'm not going to say The Expendables is the most coherent movie I've ever seen in my life, but the action is beautifully executed. The dynamics between the characters, the expendable characters, are great. They, they all kind of bounce off each other very well. I thought, and I'm disappointed he's not in the sequel, I thought Mickey Rourke, even though he's not in like the action scenes, does a great job of just, being like Stallone's confidant.
Well, what's funny about him is that, in a way, yes, he used to be a has-been, but he had already returned by the time The Expendables came.
Yeah, he
had already been in The Wrestler, and
Iron Man 2.
Iron Man 2 and Sin City. So he was already staging his own comeback.
Yes.
And coming back to The Expendables was a little bit like, oh, wait, he's a big shot now. He's not a has-been.
What Stallone was looking to do, and again, I respect this, and it's going to be more apparent in the sequel, is taking guys who may have fallen off the radar and bringing them back. He had offered Jean-Claude Van Damme a part in the first Expendables. He turned him down.
Yeah.
Well, now he's the main villain in part 2. He saw the bump that everybody got.
Quickly, let's talk about a little bit of who were the big names that came to this film.
Oh, well, you had, besides Stallone, you had Jet Li, you had Jason Statham, you had Dolph Lundgren, who goes all the way back to the 80s with Stallone.
Was Bruce Willis in the first one, too?
Bruce Willis and Schwarzenegger were in very small cameos, and they will have very expanded roles in the sequel. And then you had Terry Crews and Randy Couture. These are younger guys, but, still popular. So it was like a mishmash of old and new, the group. And Expendables was a big hit. It was a bigger hit than Rocky Balboa or Rambo.
Wow.
People were talking sequel almost right away. And old action stars were lining up to be in the sequel.
Well, that's the thing. Now that he has the guinea pig out there, everybody's like, okay, it worked. Okay, maybe I'm interested in doing it now. Now, he follows this up with a very small role in an animated film.
Oh, yeah, he does
which
a voiceover.
He's done them in the past. He did Ants a long time ago. This one was called Zookeeper. And from what I understand, he played Joe the Lion. Yeah, it was one of these guy works at a zoo and the animals talk to him type of deal.
Right.
So this wasn't animated. This was like CGI type of stuff. Animals talking type of deal, which was pretty forgettable as far as I can remember.
Most of Kevin James's films are.
Following The Expendables, pretty much if you kind of discount Zookeeper, he starts prepping some other pretty big films, I would say. One of them being a sequel to The Expendables. The other one, a film called Bullet to the Head or Bullet in the Head. I'm not sure which is the final title, but it is, I know, an old Hong Kong film that they're remaking.
Right. It's directed by John Woo. That was
the original.
The original was directed by John Woo, and it's his follow-up to The Killer. Honestly, I saw it a long, long time ago, and I don't remember it very well. It's generally regarded as a little bit more serious than his other films like Better Tomorrow
and Hard Boiled.
Hard Boiled.
Yeah.
It's not considered as big as those other films, but yeah.
Now, you said Walter Hill is directing. Now, we haven't seen Walter Hill in a pretty long time.
Certainly haven't. I don't know where he's been languishing. I mean, he was big in the 80s, just like Stallone.
I know. I mean, like, that's a name that you almost wanted to see it succeed.
I do. I really do.
Now, what do we know about the Expendables 2? Because, again, they tried the first one. It worked. So now you have all these other names that some of them rejected him.
Yes.
Some of them are coming back, and some of them are new ones he couldn't get in the first place.
Right.
What are some of the names coming back?
Well, you have Jean-Claude Van Damme as the main villain. You have expanded roles for Arnold Schwarzenegger and Bruce Willis. They're not going to be on the level as the other main cast,
right?
But they're going to have much more significant roles. There was a rumor going around for a long time that John Travolta might be in it, but that hasn't really panned out. If it is, maybe it's a big secret. I don't know. And Chuck Norris.
There's a big name from the 80s.
Yeah, and he's stirred up a little bit of controversy with some comments that he made on the web about
the rating?
About the rating, saying, he doesn't support profanity, he's a Christian, and he doesn't want to see the movie be rated R. I don't know. Stallone confirmed that it's going to be rated R. I can't believe that Chuck Norris has that kind of clout where he can say, I'm not going to be in this film unless, or I demand that this film be PG-13.
And the other film that I think it's on the radar right now, it's something called The Tomb.
Yes. That's his first major pairing with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh.
They're going to be shooting it in Louisiana very shortly. It's set in a prison.
That's right. They did say something about that.
Schwarzenegger is the prisoner. Stallone is somebody who is, I don't know if this is going to sound like a stretch, but designs prisons that you can't break out of, but he gets trapped in this prison.
I thought it was a sequel to Lockup.
Yeah. And he has to rely on Schwarzenegger to help him get out.
Well, that sounds interesting. I mean, obviously, Schwarzenegger coming back in the mix now that he hasn't been doing movies in a while. You put those two together, and that's a pretty big pairing.
For nostalgia's sake, it should get a decent bump in box office, but I don't know how big of a, hit it'll be. We'll see.
Well, at this stage in his career, he is kind of trending upwards, if you will. He's starting to
definitely come back.
Go up. Hopefully, he won't hit a peak. But what do you think will happen to Stallone in terms of, do you think he'll continue? As long as he works, he goes through these peaks and valleys?
Well, I think he's in his last valley. I mean, I think he's probably enjoying the last major bump in popularity that he's ever going to have in his life. I mean, he is at least 65 years old now.
Wow.
It looks like he'll go out on a high note. That remains to be seen with Schwarzenegger, with his films that he's got coming out.
But you think he's the type of guy that will stop working if he's healthy?
I don't know, because at a certain point, he's not going to be able to do these roles. And he's trending up with action movies. So no one really, accepts him in drama.
Even though he was great in Copland.
But that didn't do it for him. So, as a fan, I hope his popularity keeps going up and up. I'm happy to see he's back sort of on top. And, I'm always eager for what's coming.
Cool. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed our 4-part. Believe it or not, this has been going on for almost a year.
Finally over.
And this was Steve's idea, out of all things. Look back, retrospective of all the Stallone films that we've looked at. Obviously, he's done a couple more things here. They're little tiny things, cameos here or there. But these were the big things that kind of made him what he is today. I would like to thank Steve for being our, what's the word?
Expert?
No.
Stalker?
No. Our guide on this road through Stallone's life. And
my pleasure.
Please join us again next time where we'll do another show, maybe another retrospective, maybe another commentary, or just a regular show here on Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye.
But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward.
Who was the greatest? Who was the best of all time? If two athletes from different eras could actually compete against one another, who would come out on top? In one corner, the reigning champion Mason "The Line" Dixon. He'll be pitted against the former two-time heavyweight champion Rocky Balboa. Computer says Rocky Balboa would be triumphant.
I think there's still some stuff in the basement.
What basement?
In here. I think I want to, fight. Nothing big, small stuff, locally.
What are you trying to prove, Pop?
I thought you might want to get involved.
Don't you think you're too, old?
I think your brain's losing altitude.
You heard Rocky Balboa applied for a license. You want me to fight a guy that I can beat with both hands tied behind my back?
That computer fight
Got a lot of people curious.
Yeah, but I ain't interested in getting like mangled and embarrassed.
People are gonna think you're going crazy.
What's crazy about standing toe to toe saying I am?
If this is something that you gotta do, then you do it. Fighters fight.
To beat this guy, you need speed. You don't have it. You've got calcium deposits on most of your joints, so sparring is out.
I had that problem.
So what we'll be calling on is blunt force trauma. Heavy-duty punches that will rattle his ancestors. Let's start building some hurting bombs.
Yeah, we ain't playing with you.
Hockey, the press has labeled you a Balboasaurus. How do you feel about that?
It's a fight. Head buster. We gon' hit him with the left.
Larry, why is this billed as an exhibition?
So they wouldn't have to call it an execution.
It's a fight. Head buster. It's a fight.
It takes guts climbing back in that ring knowing you're gonna take a beating.
It's over.
Ain't nothing over till it's over.
Where's that from? The 80s?
That's probably in the 70s.
Rocky Balboa.
Can you do it?
Stop.